This is a DZO Film full frame Cine Prime, and this is for the EF or PL mount. However, I've been using these lenses on my Sony a7S Mark III with just a simple $20 adapter. Now in this video, I want to go through why you would choose to get a set of Cine Primes and what makes these DZO Film Vespid full frame primes so special. All right guys, so let's get into it. So having a set of Cine Primes is interesting because on one hand, you get consistency across the entire lens lineup, whereas on the other hand, you don't get things like autofocus or stabilization. So if you're someone who is used to just using photo lenses, there are some things that make Cinema Primes super unique and why you would want to choose them. Now, I just want to say a special thanks to DZO Film for sponsoring my Pony Express trip and sponsoring this video. They sent me their entire lineup of Vespid full frame primes to use to make this film. And so a lot of the footage that you'll see in my Pony Express video is all shot using this set of full frame primes. Now, I did a trip with my buddy Justin and we went from Salt Lake City, Utah, all the way to Lake Tahoe, California. It was a 550-mile trek in 9-degree weather over the course of 3 days. And I'll put a link down below into the description where you can see that full film and see how I integrated some of the footage shot using these full frame primes into a longer documentary style piece of content. So these lenses are named Vespid after wasps because they're supposed to be nimble, light, and made for like documentary style shooting. So this set of lenses is not DZO Film's first. They've actually have two different styles of Cine zooms, and that was the first time that I actually started working with their lenses. One thing that I always wanted when using the GH5 and GH5S was a set of Cine zooms for my client work. So DZO Film has a set of Cine zooms. It's 10-25 and 20-70, and they look great, and I've been using them for a lot of different projects. However, recently I've switched to the Sony a7S Mark III and the FX6 and the a7C, just all of Sony's full frame lineup. And I thought it'd be great to try out these lenses and also take them on an adventure. So let's get into some of the tech specs around these Vespid primes, and you'll see why they're special and why they're unique compared to photo lenses. So with this set of Cine Primes, you basically have the same filter thread across the entire lens lineup. So you have a 77mm filter thread, and the diameter is a 80mm diameter. So what that means is when you're changing out filters like ND filters or a matte box, you don't have to have step-up rings or you don't have to have different size filters. You could just have one set of filters and switch between every lens. So when I was out filming, I had a PolarPro Basecamp matte box, and I just used the 80mm attachment that just a quick thumb screw pops the matte box off, and then I'm able to swap my lens, put the matte box back on, and I'm good to start shooting again. So having the same size makes it super easy to swap lenses and makes it so that you can keep shooting and use different lenses. Typically with photo lenses, when I have a set of primes, I'm bringing step down rings or step up rings or different size filters. I'll bring multiple filters just so that I can, make it easy to swap, because workflow for me is super important. So having the same filter thread on the front does make it a lot easier to work with these lenses. Now, also with all of these lenses, they're very similar weights. So they go from 732 grams all the way up to 980 grams. So between those two weights, you have the entire set of lenses. Now, this makes it great when working with gimbals, because when you're swapping lenses out on your gimbal, you have to rebalance depending on the weight. These lenses are also very similar in the length. So you have 87mm, 100mm, or 120mm for the length of these lenses. So when I was swapping lenses on my gimbal, I only had to do some minor tweaks to be able to rebalance it rather than have to go through the whole process of trying to get the camera perfectly balanced on the gimbal. It's typically just like pulling the camera forward, back a little bit, maybe just change it slightly on the height, but for the majority of the time, I would just put my 35 on, my 50, or like the 25, and I would have to do these minor tweaks and be able to start shooting again. And also because they're so lightweight, you don't need a bunch of heavy gear. So I was using the Polar Pro matte box with the full frame primes on the A7S on my gimbal. And then the tripod that I was using was the Peak Design carbon fiber tripod. It's a lightweight tripod. It's not meant to hold huge, heavy setups. So having smaller cinema primes made it easy to use all of my lightweight gear that I like to use when I'm out shooting these style of adventure films. And that's key for me because when I'm shooting these projects, I want to be able to be light and fast, and I don't want to carry a ton of extra gear. So this was an overlanding trek. I was able to carry more than I typically do if I'm like hiking with a backpack. I brought the entire set of full frame primes with me, and I had them in this Pelican case. It's not a huge case for the entire set. However, if I needed to go smaller, lighter, and faster, I probably would have only taken half the lenses because I used the 25, 35, 50, and 70. Those were my favorite focal lengths to play around with. Some of these shots that you'll see where we're driving through these epic landscapes, I was also using the 125. And that's just such a cool focal length when doing these long, wide shots. Just creating that dynamic of having epic mountains in the distance coming forward because of the long focal length. It just creates these different looking shots that you typically don't see when you're shooting on wide lenses all the time. Now, one thing that's really special about cine lenses is the focus throw. So on photo lenses, when you're manually focusing, you have like an inch before like you're out of focus. So on these cine zooms, to get through the entire focus ring, it's 270-degree rotation. That's a long ways. So you can do these nice feathering focus pulls when you're out shooting, and you don't have to worry about like just getting it just right. It becomes more of an organic way of shooting when you are using video specific lenses because they have features that make it easier to shoot your videos. Now on these lenses, they're geared. So if you're someone who adds a focus motor onto your setup or another motor for your aperture, these lenses make it very easy to work with the entire lineup. So the focus gears are in the same position on every lens throughout the lineup. So if you were to swap on the gimbal or on your bigger cinema setup, well, you don't have to switch where your motor or your follow focus is. It's just an easy pop on, pop off, keep moving. And that makes it a lot easier to shoot with these styles of lenses for video. Now let's talk about the look that I was able to get while filming with these. So they're definitely sharp. Like these lenses will get you a sharp looking image, but they're not overly sharp. The cinematic look has a kind of softer feel to it. And I've noticed when I'm working with these lenses, it does have that cinematic kind of vintage soft feel without being like out of focus. There's a difference. You don't want to have things out of focus, but you don't also want to have everything super, super duper sharp. Now, in terms of the speed, they're a T2.1, so they're in T-stops, not F-stops. And a T2.1 isn't the fastest lens out there, but you're still gonna get super shallow depth of field, especially when you're shooting on a full frame camera. You really don't need to go faster than that. And being that it is a T2.1, that allowed them to keep these lenses smaller. So I think it's a good balance between size and weight and the aperture that you can get out of it. So it's a T2.1 to a T22. And because I shoot on the Sony a7S Mark III, low light really isn't that big a deal, so I don't need to squeeze every bit of light out of the iris. So let's talk bokeh, because bokeh is important when it comes to a set of cine lenses. You don't want to have gross bokeh in the background. So I've noticed that these create nice orbs in the back, and then with lens flares, it's a nice organic looking lens flare. So you can see here's just a few samples of these lenses stopped down in different ways with lights flaring right into the middle of the lens. Now, something else that's really great with these lenses is there's minimal to no focus breathing when you're doing something like a rack focus. So one problem that happens with some lenses is you'll get some breathing, and it has some weird effects when you're switching from background to foreground. So these have super minimal focus breathing. And then when it comes to chromatic aberration and softness in the corners, I really haven't noticed anything major. I typically like to go out and shoot with the lenses. And in real world settings, I haven't noticed any issues with these lenses. The footage just looks pretty solid. So there's a huge set of lenses here. And if you are someone who's going to be swapping lenses out all the time, then getting the entire set actually does make sense, and it's a lot cheaper than if you were to buy each one individually. But in the world of cine primes, especially for full frame cameras, this leans to the cheaper side while still giving you a lot of features that you would expect from a high-end set of cine primes. So some questions that might come up are, did you miss autofocus when using these lenses? And for the content that I've been shooting, autofocus hasn't really been an issue. Like here, when I'm in my office and I'm shooting something quick of just myself, yes, it is nice to have autofocus, but when I'm behind camera and I'm filming subjects or I'm able to have a little bit of time to set up a shot, I don't necessarily need autofocus. So I haven't really had an issue working with these lenses, being that they are fully manual. And when it comes to stabilization, I just turn on the in-body stabilization on my Sony, and because of the matte box and the lens and the way it's set up, it does become a little bit of a heavier setup, so I can handhold it and still looks pretty good. I think these lenses look great, and I'm happy with the footage that I've been getting out of them. In any filming situation, it really comes down to the kind of tools that you need to be able to capture the scene and tell your story. Not every lens works for every situation, but if you are a creator that needs more control on your lens and you want a set of primes that is consistent on the look and feel and everything else that goes with it, I highly suggest you check out the DZO Vespid full frame primes, and I'll put a link down below in the description to where you guys can learn more information about these primes. And if you haven't seen my Pony Express film yet, then I highly suggest you check it out right here. 3 days, 550 miles, 9 degrees. It was a crazy trip. All right, guys, I'll see you over there.